Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we have something really interesting to talk about. Late last week, on Friday, I believe it was, Ubisoft put out an announcement of a brand new technology that they have in development at their Ubisoft Stockholm studio called Ubisoft Scalar. Now, inherently, this has nothing directly linked to The Division. However, I want to present how I think that this could be game-changing for The Division 3, which I will reiterate for anyone who does not know. Yes, one day I do believe we will receive a Division 3. Probably not for 4 to 5 years. I think once Massive wraps up majorly on development with Star Wars, because I believe Avatar is going to be kind of a long-term live service deal as they make expansions for the subsequent films that are going to release over this decade. Star Wars is probably going to be a more standalone experience, and so I do believe that once they wrap on that in, a few years from now, they will probably begin full-scale development on The Division 3. That's just my own personal belief. However, with the promise of The Division 3, if it does come, which I do think it will, being built for next-gen only, which Avatar currently is being for this year, Division 2 was held back by a lot of its technical aspects having to work on last-gen consoles, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. If that barrier was gone, and we have a next-gen only game just starting off the platform for The Division 3, introducing this new technology with Ubisoft Scalar, we could see unprecedented and incredible technological feats pulled off for The Division 3, the likes of which we've been wanting for a long time. And so, clearly, I am not the most technical person in the world. I'm not going to be able to give you the most detailed description of what exactly this technology can do, but we're going to go through this article that they put out, and I'm going to do my best to explain how this could be really revolutionary for the future of not only The Division, if it does get implemented into The Division 3, but gaming as a whole. I think this is super interesting, so I wanted to go through it with you all, and I hope you enjoy this. I did first hear about this on Twitter. Ubisoft put out like a minute 45 video that kind of went over what this article does, but this article does go into some more detail. I can't show that video, I don't believe, because of copyright, so I will put a link to both that video and this article in the description below so that you can go check it out for yourself. But without further ado, let's kind of get into what this article goes over and just, go piece by piece and kind of talk about it on the way through. So yeah, from March 18th, 2022, Ubisoft Scalar promises to change the way developers make games. Over time, game developers have pushed the boundaries of what's possible, but no matter what someone can dream, there is always a limit when it comes to computing power on local hardware. As games become more complex, the engines needed to build them do too. The result is an increasingly complex set of interconnected, moving gears that are exponentially more difficult to update and improve. What if those component game engine parts weren't interlocking gears, but could be separated, iterated on, and tested entirely independent of one another? Those are the questions that Ubisoft Stockholm set out to answer when they began development on Ubisoft Scalar. So, that introduction alone, I think, is a very insightful look into kind of what goes on behind game development. This is the kind of stuff that I try to explain in some of my videos, but obviously not being in that position myself, it's hard for me to always articulate it the best. But basically, the longer a game goes on, right, the harder it is to go back and change stuff because it's linked to so many more things in the back end. So when people say, oh, it should be so easy for them to go in and do this and this and this in The Division 2, it's probably not, because that is interconnected to so many other things that once you change one thing, something else is going to spiral out of control. This is why we see so many weird bugs so often. Like back when they did I forget what they implemented, but when, wearing one of the pieces of gear, like major characters disappear, that kind of stuff happens because when you try and change one little thing that you think would be very easy to do, it's connected to so many other things that if you don't go in and properly check all of those things, which I'm sure is a huge undertaking, suddenly you have all of these unintended consequences and things get super messy. So that's a good introduction for them to put there, but let's move on. And this is the video. Again, I'm not going to show it, but I will leave a link down below. Ubisoft Scalar is a new foundational technology that enables Ubisoft titles to utilize the power of the cloud to ensure that developers aren't limited by time or hardware, but by their imaginations. The result could enable game worlds that are bigger, more social, and richer than anything that's ever been seen before at Ubisoft. To understand more about Ubisoft Scalar and the possible implications it has, we spoke with Ubisoft Scalar product director, not going to say that name, I apologize because I will butcher it terribly, Ubisoft Stockholm Managing Director Patrick Bach, and Ubisoft Scalar Technical Director Christian, again, not going to say your last name, I do apologize. How did this project begin at Ubisoft Stockholm? Patrick said, when we started the studio in late 2017, we did so with the mandate to push the boundaries of game development and technology. How could we reimagine what games could and should be in the future, and how do we build towards that? Most games are an iteration of what has been done before, building on the shoulders of giants. We wanted to break free and create create something fresh and impactful. And then Christian said, when I joined, the focus was on how we really want to create games moving forward, not only at the limitations we have, but also talking to people building those games. How do they want to work? What options do they want to have? What limitations would they like to get rid of? What technology can we use for that vision? It very much started from the game creator's point of view, rather than trying to incrementally improve on what we have. From there, we could clearly state, this is how we want our tech to work. And those are certainly some very bold, questions and statements and claims. So let's see what they plan to do about that. Games are, to a certain extent, limited by the specifications of the hardware they're playing on. How does Ubisoft Scalar change that? The limitation has always been, or that limitation has always been there as long as we've made games. Over time, game developers have become really good at hiding and bypassing these limitations so the player doesn't see them. That's our expertise. What Ubisoft Scalar allows us to do is simply get rid of those constraints. Once we remove them, what do we actually want to create? Doing away with the constraints we're used to creates an entirely new set of challenges, though. We've been so used to working within those boundaries that now we need to relearn and rethink how we make games and ask ourselves what we actually want and how do we get there. This changes everything. So that's a pretty interesting statement. The example I will give here, because I do actually have a bit of insight here, is that one of the things he's mentioning when he says that where was it? Over time, game developers have become really good at hiding and bypassing these limitations. Think about in the Division 1 and even in the Division 2, like when you're leaving the base of operations in Div 1, you're walking up those front steps. It makes you walk and you can't run in there. And in Warlords of New York, when you're leaving Haven, you have to walk out the front gates. That's because they're intentionally slowing you down so that the game world around you has time to render in and be ready for you to, get there without having to go through a loading screen. But by making you walk, it gives the game and processing the amount of time needed to get that stuff ready so that you're not looking at a bunch of butter blocks when you walk out there. So that's, I think, a good example of something that he's talking about. And he's saying with this new technology, stuff like that wouldn't even need to occur because they could just process it all in the cloud, basically. So it's super inspiring at this stage of our career to have something that feeling of freedom and awe as when we were teenagers, just taking our very first steps in game development. When we talk about the cloud, people often associate that with streaming games, but that's not what we're talking about with Ubisoft Scalar, right? Exactly. It can be confusing, but we're not talking about game streaming. It's the difference between cloud streaming and cloud computing. Cloud streaming is a distribution model. It improves people's access to games, but it doesn't change, in essence, what games are or the quality of them. The game is still being run on a single processing machine placed remotely and then streamed via the cloud to your screen. It's a bit like if you had a console placed very far away and your internet connection is replacing a very long HDMI cable to your TV. What Ubisoft Scalar is focused on is cloud computing. Cloud computing, what Ubisoft Scalar enables, means the processing power for a game isn't tied to a single machine, but decentralized computation systems. The processing is taking place in the cloud. This eliminates the limits of local hardware for players, improves the quality of games, and opens up new possibilities for game developers. Okay, I think that's a very important distinction that they make because cloud streaming is something that, the industry's been trying to move into for quite a while, but we've seen its limitations. Stuff like with Stadia, where you're trying to stream different games to your, little bit of hardware that doesn't have nearly enough actual hardware within itself to actually run the games, but you're streaming the game from somewhere else where the game is running. But then your experience with the game on that screen that you're playing on is entirely dependent on the internet connection and the stability of that connection. And as soon as that gets messed up, then your experience gets messed up. What they're talking about here is that instead of again, I'm not a tech person, so my explanation is going to be pretty shoddy, but instead of having, like, say I have my Xbox right next to me right now while I'm recording this, instead of me running the Division 2 on my Xbox, that whole game and every different decision and whatever is being done in the game is being done up in the cloud, meaning that so many more things can happen at once because you're not limited to a physical box where all of those components need to be inside of. It sounds kind of similar to cloud streaming, honestly, but I think I can understand the difference they're trying to make, and it sounds pretty awesome. Can you give us an idea what Ubisoft Scalar changes, both on the developer side and on the player side? Ubisoft Scalar is a production tool that opens up the possibilities of cloud for our games, removing that traditional barrier of the local hardware you have at home and widening the field of what types of games can be created. It is a tool to open up new possibilities for creatives, and due to that, I expect to see a broader spectrum of games coming out of it in the future. So another good way to look at this, I would say, is that think about the Division 2. and how a lot of its stuff is limited by being on the Xbox One and the PS4. The things that the devs have pointed out before is that the player sizes in the Dark Zone, while I think some of it was design-based, they wanted to try and change the Dark Zone experience, some of it had to be done, because with the improvements they made to Snowdrop, with increased graphical fidelity, with lighting, and the increased player customization, more stuff had to be rendered at once, and the old systems just weren't, being able to do that at 20 or 24 players like we saw in the Division 1, and so they had to limit the amount of people that are there. But in theory, with this technology, you can render as much stuff as you want. You could have characters be as customizable as you wish. You could have graphics be as insane as you want and have 100 people in the same place, because it's not all being processed in one little box. It's being processed out in the cloud. So that's pretty interesting. What types of new games can players expect thanks to Ubisoft Scalar? One very important aspect the Ubisoft Scalar brings is that services are always available. The game is always running, and it's always possible to update pieces of it. Developers can create very rich worlds that can develop, evolve, and change as players are playing them. It brings a much closer connection to developers and players. It will become possible to have more players in a single shared world, which I think will introduce new social experiences that we haven't seen before. You can also create world simulations on a scale and to a complexity that we've never seen before. And when you add that to one of the pillars and strengths of Ubisoft, building worlds, it allows us to build bigger and richer worlds for our players to experience. We'll be able to push the boundaries of what games can be. It's a new challenge for game designers, and it's going to lead to new experiences. Okay, this paragraph specifically screams Division. We've, as players, we have wanted more social interactions and possibilities in the Division since 2016. We want to see more people in the open world. We want to see more people in the Dark Zone. We want more stuff like that. And, you can see, they say right there, you're going to be able to create worlds on a scale and complexity that we've never seen before. The Division is known for how intricate and detailed its open worlds are, and we've always wanted more and more and more of that. But that has always been a constraint of technology, of development time, of all that stuff. But if this new technology is allowing for more of that to be built at a more intricate level, imagine if they did launch a Division game with, 3 whole cities that are like double the size of what New York and DC were, and you could travel between all of them. Maybe you could even walk between them. I think in the past, this stuff is always, when people say, oh, I want, 3 whole states to be the map of the Division 3. And I was like, well, that's a little bit unrealistic. Well, potentially with this technology, that could actually be something that's somewhat feasible. Again, I do think it is subject to development time. Obviously, you're not just going to be able to snap a finger and have, worlds created with the detail that we love in the Division, but I think the technology is now catching up with where people's dreams have been for a long time, and that's certainly very cool to see. Is Ubisoft Scalar a game engine? The simple answer is no. Ubisoft Scalar is a technology that can work in concert with our existing game engine, such as Anvil and Snowdrop, to open up new possibilities. And I think this makes sense. I still imagine the engines being the asset production and placement tools, like you're making character models, you're making enemy models and all that stuff in the engine. That's where you make the game. But then at least in my head, and again, I could be wrong, I see Ubisoft Scalar as a distribution method to increase the size of those productions to insane levels that we haven't seen before. I think that's what they're getting at here. We changed the playing field quite a bit by adding the possibility to break out each game engine function into its own microservice. I almost said microverse. This gives the option to work only on a single piece without having to worry about having all the other pieces on your machine. It greatly speeds up iteration speed and how quickly you can test your changes. It also makes it relatively easy to share your modifications with others. It really keeps all the things we're already used to and gives them more space to evolve and change in order to open up more possibilities. So again, similar to the example I was giving earlier of when we had the issue with our characters disappearing because of one change to a texture or an apparel item, imagine you could take these things and all change them independently, and when you put them back in, they wouldn't then have these, snowball effects on a lot of other things that they're connected to. Everything would be a lot more independent. I think that makes game development safer and probably more efficient, like they're saying in there. When can we see a game develop with Ubisoft Scalar? Ubisoft Stockholm is working on a new IP that is developed with Ubisoft Scalar, which will fully leverage the possibilities of this technology. It's a bit too early to go into more details on this project, but we at the studio can't wait to show the world what we're cooking up. Ubisoft Scalar is a central technology available to all Ubisoft studios. It's being spearheaded by Ubisoft Stockholm in collaboration with Ubisoft Studios Massive, Ubisoft Red Links, Ubisoft Bucharest, and Ubisoft Kyiv. It's a big part of this development has been once-in-a-lifetime experience, as you don't see things that change the landscape to this extent very often. All of our studios are growing, and we're always looking for more people to be involved. If you're interested, take a look and apply at these open positions. So, They name drop Ubisoft Massive right there. And I very much think that even Star Wars game, potentially, because that's still in development. That's probably coming out in, I don't know, 2 years, 2.5 years. That could take advantage of this this technology. I absolutely think that if the Division 3 is on the docket after that, we will definitely see Ubisoft Scalar influence it to some degree. And that's very exciting to me personally. Also, I'm very interested to see what this new IP is that they are currently building there that is leveraging this new technology, right now. And something I wanted to bring up that's pretty cool if you're a Division fan is our very own Hamish Bode, who of course used to be the lead community developer on The Division and The Division 2 for so many years. We all love him. He said, on the 18th when Ubisoft Stockholm, tweeted out that announcement, "So stoked to be working on this. I wanted to work for this studio ever since I heard about this project and the new IP to follow." So we knew, or I had known, I don't know how many people did, that he had gone to Stockholm, but it wasn't really clear, why that was or whatever. But apparently he saw this technology. I'm sure the, people inside the company get briefed on this stuff all the time. And that was really where he wanted to focus his efforts. So that's really cool. And I am certainly very, very curious to see what kind of new IP and what game they're working on that is going to take advantage of this technology, because all of this stuff sounds really, really cool. Even to someone who is not very technologically inclined like myself, at least for this kind of stuff, it sounds really promising. It sounds really cool. And I really would love to see how this could influence, our favorite franchise of The Division. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you can be updated every time I upload. Let me know your thoughts on this kind of news and the breakdown of Ubisoft Scalar. Do you think that it sounds like a very cool and promising technology such as myself? I mean, I would much rather, I think I said this on Twitter the other day, I would much rather Ubisoft invest in stuff like this rather than NFTs, stuff that actually affects the games that are coming our way that we want to play and enjoy and experience. I would much rather they focus their efforts there than on stuff that's purely monetary and purely for, non-gameplay purposes, we'll say that. Whereas Scalar seems like it really could be, the next evolution of gaming, at least in some of these open world platforms like they're talking about. And that screams Division. I think Division 3 could really be affected by this depending on how they do it, and if it does come, which I think it will. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on that, everybody. What you think about the technology, what you think about its potential implementation into the Division. I'll be very curious to hear all of your thoughts about that. That is going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and until the next one, guys, RogueGold out.